Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This is Powerful and Dangerous, the work and legacy of Audre Lorde with the Alice Austen House Museum. My name is Allison, and I'd like to start you off by welcoming all of you to today's event on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, New York Public Library, and Queens Public Library's CulturePass program. I also want to thank our friends at the Alice Austen House Museum for being here and putting this event together for all of us. If you aren't already familiar, CulturePass is a program that allows active cardholders with all three of New York City's public library systems to reserve free passes to visit 75 participating cultural sites across the 5 boroughs. Our normal service has been suspended due to the temporary closure of these partner organizations because of COVID-19. So today's free public event is part of a special series that was taking place over the course of the summer. It's almost over, unfortunately. And the goal was to bring the cultural life of our city right into your homes. You can find a full lineup of events at www.culturepass.nyc. I encourage everyone to check it out. There are programs for kids, teens, adults, and the whole families. And if you missed any programs over the summer, they will be rebroadcast all throughout fall. But before we dive into today's program, I do want to quickly thank our sponsors. CulturePass is made possible through generous funding from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, the Charles H. Revson Foundation, the New York Community Trust, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. The libraries are truly grateful for all of this support. This program is live and being recorded, so feel free to ask us any questions during the program, and there will be a Q&A section at the end. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Victoria Munro, the Executive Director of the Alice Austen House, who will be kicking things off for us. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Allison, and we are thrilled to have this partnership with all three library systems in New York City and to really expand the audience for this incredibly exciting panel. I am just phenomenally thankful to be sitting here tonight virtually with these incredibly powerful women and to discuss the work and legacy of Audre Lorde. Just to say very quickly for our audiences, the Alice Austen House is a historic house located on Staten Island, and its namesake, Alice Austen, lived here for most of her life. She was a lesbian photographer born in 1866 and left us an incredible legacy of over 7,000 photographs of a changing New York City. We are also a nationally designated site of LGBTQ history and a very close neighbor to the now designated site of where Audre Lorde lived here on Staten Island. We're less than a mile apart, and that is a private residence, and we feel here at the Alice Austen House it's very important for us to lift up the work and provide knowledge to everyone and also school children here on Staten Island to inspire them with the incredibly meaningful and powerful words of Audre Lorde. And we currently have a year-long exhibition on display here in our galleries, which will reopen on September 8th, of the words and images of Audre Lorde. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this panel really over to these incredible women who are here today and let them introduce themselves. But let me tell you who we have coming up first is Blanche Weisen Cook and Clare Coss, sitting together in one of our screen boxes here. And these two phenomenal women have helped me over the course of the last year to curate and put together this incredible exhibition, which I hope you all get a chance to view, and you can view it virtually via a link from our website. And so I'd like Blanche and Clare to say a few words about who they are and their connection to Audre. Go ahead.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm very moved. Audre Lorde is powerful and dangerous and globally life enhancing. Come this way. I first met Audre when I was a freshman at Hunter College, and Audre had returned to Hunter from her trip to Mexico. She was at the time editor of the literary magazine called The Echo, and also worked for the school newspaper. And I was active in the student government. And so I became president of the student government. And so we shared an office and became great friends. I have to say, lifelong friends. And I guess I'll get into that if you like later. They're all the lovers of Audre Lorde. Audre used to say, "You don't know anybody." Never mind.
Everybody wants to hear Blanche.
She would have to go there. Oh, God.
First 5 minutes.
Audre is so inspiring. And when I was thinking about what I want to say, right now there's a big movement at Hunter to name one of the Hunter buildings, the big West Wing building, for Audre Lorde. And imagine that. There was a big movement in the 80s to have an Audre Lorde Poetry Center at Roosevelt House, and it, you know, this big poetry center. And my students and Audre's students were really the leaders behind it. And just everywhere you look, the students that Audre taught have become global activists doing incredible work, writers, teachers, phenomenal people. And so there was Rosetta Capitorto, Kathleen Walsh Darcy, Melinda Goodman. Her students were just legion. I'm leaving BJ Kowalski, who's the mayor of her town. They're just incredible, the incredible impact that Audre had as a teacher and as a poet. Audre and I actually taught together at John Jay. We taught the first course in America. It was called American Women in Black and White. And students at the time, this is like 1968 or 70, our students at the time were mostly police officers. And they brought their wives and their mothers and their sisters and their aunts. And then the bar girls found out we were teaching this course, and they invaded the class. It was the biggest, most crowded room in the world. And it was just incredible. And Audre, who has written a great deal about Your Silence Will Not Protect You, came out. We did. We both came out. We posed initially as divorced women, which we were. There was a period when lesbians got married for all kinds of reasons, mostly to have children, actually. And Audre and Ed were really, well, they were very lucky. We have Elizabeth Lord Rollins and Jonathan Ashley Rollins as a result, and they are two of the most extraordinary people on the planet. But the students and the way the world changed over the time that Audre started to teach is really, really incredible. And coming out and when she taught at Tougaloo, she came out to her students as a Black woman poet, leader, married to a white man. And she's written about this, what it meant. and how important it was to be totally honest about her life. And then she met Francis Clayton at Tuvalu. And Francis, of course, became one of our best friends as well. And I think, I don't know, Beth, would you call her the other mother?
She was an awesome parent. Yeah, definitely. A special individual.
And she really was a special individual, a leader in so many ways for all of the things that we were doing. And Audre's sense, I think one of the reasons that she's so globally, not just so globally famous, but so globally used as a mentor, is that she really understands the ways in which we are all connected. And she's written about, you know, which of our truths are, you know, the most important today. And all of our truths are the most important today. And when I was looking to see, what do I want to quote, I came upon her extraordinary conversation with Adrienne Rich, which is published in a variety of books. But Audre talked about, Audre talked about how given, I got to come back into the picture, about given how the world is embattled and race is so critical to every single thing that happens in this country, that we have to really be vigilant and vigorous and activist on all of our issues, and all of our issues are connected. And I think that this conversation about how Audre became a teacher, and at first she was a librarian and didn't think she could teach, but Galen Williams invited her to, she gave her a fellowship to Tuvalu, and that was Audre's first teaching job in Mississippi. And she writes about how that decision really changed her life. And how she taught was she had relationships with every single one of her students. It's not
Blanche, I would love to dive into that more deeply. If we can introduce each panelist, and
Right.
then that was one of the very first core things that we wanted to discuss together was the power of Audre's teaching. Thank you so much. I would love to hear from Clare Coss. Your name's not on the screen right now, but you're right next to Blanche there. Hi, Clare.
her name should be on the Clare.
Hi, hello everybody. Well, I met Audre through Blanche, of course, and Blanche had a dinner party with her husband, with me and my husband, with Audre and her husband. A dinner for six. And
I love it.
that was our first meeting, and we all went on to other things, to 207 St. Paul's Avenue, to Staten Island, where we spent birthdays, Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, and all the time in between in that wonderful house with Beth, Jonathan, Francis, and Audre. And she had on the second floor office, a small office for her writing, and it said over the door, "Poet at Work." Didn't it say that? You remember that?
I remember that.
And you
Yeah,
two on the
I
third
do. I
floor.
remember that room very well.
When we would knock on the door, ring the doorbell for say Thanksgiving, we would hear these two galloping horses come down the stairs from the third floor and swing open the door. It was just so wonderful. You really, you made us feel welcome. Well, Audre was always a constant and is a constant inspiration to me. You know, when she had her first mastectomy, rather than, you know, complain or be negative in any way, I walked into her room one day and she was climbing her fingers up the wall. Look how high I can get now. And she didn't want a prosthesis because she wants to be absolutely clear and honest about everything about her life. And she took a really clear position on that. Well, when you said she didn't have knowledge about teaching until she dove into that class, when she was going to write her first prose article, she said, I can't write prose, I'm a poet. And she wrote the first article, and then it's just a flood of wonderful essays from then on. And then she made necklaces, and I have a little show and tell here. She made necklaces. This is from shells that she picked off the beach, all the shells. And this is just one example. Her first necklace was opal stones linked by gold pieces. And it's my birthstone, so she gave it to me. And then her second necklace is this one from Blanche. We're going to give this whole collection of her necklaces to Spellman. So everybody can see this incredible. And so mine has it. She went from this very simple thing to a macrame, very intricate necklaces made with the macrame that Melinda Goodman had gotten her to the person to teach her that. And mine had has a little jade bird flying backwards. And she said, that means it's never too late to change. I love that. Just in terms of, and then her gele, she would always want us to see the African fabrics that she would find for her geles. And this is an example of one that we have over her picture. We have many, many patches of her examples of what she would wear on her head after she went to Africa. And the last thing I'll tell you about is when we went to see the eclipse in Hawaii, which had been planned for 15 years. The reservations had been made for 15 years. She had chemo just before she got on the plane. And it was so bold of her to do that, to get on an airplane, you know, in that shape. And she stayed in her room at Volcano House with Gloria for 2 whole days. And then she emerged, and then we saw the eclipse. Full eclipse. A full eclipse of the sun, and it's a t-shirt from that time. And it's 1991. And we went to Hebrew for the last 4 days. They had a festival for Audre. Because she had been there a couple of years before. She had read her poetry and talked to everybody. And now, when they left, she had challenged them to create a women's center for victims of domestic violence and rape, and a lesbian feminist gathering. So we went to this party where she actually recited some poetry and danced. It was like the most amazing, amazing moment to see her come from where she had been at the beginning of the trip to what she gave to everybody. She just inspired activism and generated people to get organized everywhere she went. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. These incredibly personal stories that you share are just so special for everyone to hear, and they expand our knowledge and, you know, understanding of Audre. Jill Gomez is very kindly joining us here tonight. Thank you so much, Jill. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be among this august group. And old friends, I really miss you all. Gosh. So I'm a poet and a playwright and a novelist, and I would say there's no part of my literary or activist life that Audre hasn't touched. And I'll just tell you how we first came to know each other, when I decided to self-publish my first collection of poetry, and I picked out a printer and I had to, put it together myself. So I pulled out a copy of Audre's chapbook, From the Land Where Other People Live, and I studied it. I studied how she laid it out. I studied pages, the typeface. I studied everything. And then I typed up my book, because there was no computers then. And I typed up each page and laid it out in a way that seemed comparable to what Audre's book looked like, and took it to the printer and got it back. And I thought it looked really good. So those were the days also you could call information and get anybody's phone number and address. So I called information. I got Audre's address, up there on Staten Island, and I mailed her a copy of the book and said, I really appreciate, I used your book as a model for myself, and I just wanted you to have it. And, thank you for your work, blah, blah, blah. I was very brief because, let's say, I was kind of embarrassed that I had presumed to copy her format. So I sent it out, and then like a week or so later, remember answering machines? I got home and I'm listening to my messages, and I wish I could do that mellifluous Caribbean voice. But there was Audre on my answering machine saying she'd gotten my book, it was really lovely, and she had some editing suggestions for me. And I was so thrilled. I couldn't believe it. Number one, she got it. Number two, she called me. And number three, she read it enough to have editing suggestions. And that was the beginning of, as they say in the movies, A Beautiful Friendship. I felt Audre became a mentor for me and a friend that has a friendship that laced its way through everything I've ever done in literature or in politics. So that's how we got started.
Amazing and wonderful story. Thank you, Joel. I'd like Cheryl Clark, who's here on the call, to introduce herself. And go ahead, Cheryl, take the floor.
Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And I just want to say, I first met Audre, I think, in 1975, when I went to ask her to do a poetry reading for the Political Defense Committee for Assata Shakur, who, I don't want to go into it now, but you can look her up on Google, who was a political prisoner. And of course, Audre said yes. And then I asked her to endorse my first book of poetry, Narratives, Poems in the Tradition of Black Women. This was 1982, 6 or 7 years later. And this is what she said. I'll just read this. I know these Black women well. In Cheryl Clark's poems, they carry their stories like flashlights.
Wow.
Then she wrote me a little note. And she said, Cheryl, you have to be more careful of your grammar. I think she said grammar. I think she said grammar. She didn't say spelling, because I know she didn't say spelling, because. But okay. Now I have a sort of Staten Island story about Audre. And it's from a longer article on Audre that I'm revising now. Okay. On that evening, I'm beginning to read it now. On that evening long ago in New Brunswick, New Jersey, which is where I used to live many years ago. I mean, a lot of years ago. In New Jersey, New Brunswick, New Jersey, I was pacing the sidewalk in front of our community center called the Neighborhood House. The Political Defense Committee for Assata Shakur had reserved it for a reading by Audre Lorde. I know Audre will arrive momentarily because she promised to do so. I don't doubt it for a minute. I am apprehensive because there is no public beyond the three faithful who always support our cause and me. Audre arrives with the late Francis Clayton, her partner at the time. The two of them laughingly greet the four of us. I apologize profusely because of the lack of audience. You had to drive all that way, say I, who didn't even drive then. They continue to laugh. He and Francis, they were probably so happy that they had one less thing to do. And Audre says, "Oh, we didn't come far. We only drove from Staten Island to exit 13 on the New Jersey Turnpike, and from there to exit 9, which is where New Brunswick was." So those are, I guess, only two fond memories of Audre. And I'll just say one other thing. Even before the Combahee River Collective Statement's enunciation of the simultaneity of oppressions, unquote, and, quote, an integrated analysis, unquote, of politics, Audre Lorde puzzles and troubles the lines of identity, longingly, whimsically, and chidingly, in both Who Said It Was Simple in 1973 and Now, 1974. I'll just stop right there. Unless you want me to go on, because I could just go on.
I we'll dive into more conversation, and I know that you'll have a lot more input then. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce now Alexis Pauline Gums. Thank you so much for joining our panel this evening. You'd like to say a few words about yourself and your connection to Audre?
I am so honored to be here, and I'm going to be brief because all I want to do is listen to you all say more stories and say more memories. But I'm really honored to be invited, and I'm at the very early stages of a book called The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, which will celebrate some of what has been said about the incredible impact that Audre Lorde has had already in multiple generations, all across the planet, in multiple movements and disciplines and fields. And I feel like getting to be here is part of representing those of us who did not meet Audre Lorde, did not know Audre Lorde, were not really alive most of the same time as Audre Lorde, but whose lives she saved anyway. And the reason that the book is called The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, and I'm really excited to ask each of you a million questions about this, if you will answer any of my questions about what there is an eternal impact that we know will continue for generations to come, and that is even almost impossible to chart, even what you were saying, Blanche, about all the students and then what they have done and all of the different ways that people call the name of Audre Lorde. But I also am really interested in the fact that I feel like she knew that she was living an eternal life at a certain point, and in her poetry and in her writing and in her invocation of African cosmologies, really did seem to be thinking in a beyond one lifetime kind of way and with an intergenerational accountability. And so what I am hoping to do is really to just think about that more and give space to that question. What is it to know you're living an eternal life? And because, you know, Audre Lorde in so many different works and in so many different moments explicitly was saying that when she was talking about her life experience and her work, it wasn't just so people could know interesting things about her, but she wanted other people to do their work and to check in about how they were living. What would it mean for us to take on life in this way? What would it mean for us to, gifted by the example of Audre Lorde, to actually live eternal lives? I don't know what that means, but that's what I'm curious about. And so that's what I'm thinking about all the time. And so that's my connection. It's a connection of gratitude and just so excited. I'm like, you all, I have my whole notebook here, and I'm so excited about everything that has been shared already, and I look forward to learning more. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alexis, and I'm sure that so many that are listening that we can't actually see you all, but thank you for being here, feeling exactly the same way, and I echo all of what you just said too. And finally, we have Audrey's daughter with us this evening. Thank you so much. Elizabeth Lord Rowlands is here. This is the first time I get to meet you in the virtual space, and I can't wait to meet in person. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Victoria. You know, I am super duper honored to be here. And I just love hearing all of you. I mean, thank you so much, and thank you to CulturePass for this. You know, it's a huge gift. Yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this. So I met Audre Lorde in 1963 when I was born. And I was the first one. And then 16 months later, my brother came along, Jonathan Rollins. So that was my meeting of Audre Lorde, the mother, and Audre Lorde, the woman. And even though as a young child, I went to readings, and so I knew my mom was a poet, and I knew my mom was a teacher. And I remember her as a librarian as well for the town school. She used to bring home bunches of books that the town school was throwing out. She read to us all the time, as did our father. And she really, you know, one of the first things I remember about my mom was just her love of words. How she would like caress them with her voice. Like really, she just loved the words. And she definitely, even, you know, for the whole time I knew her, had an attachment to the King's English. You know, grammar and stuff like that. We used to get fined 25 cents off of our allowance for every grammatical error we made in the house. But I didn't meet Audre Lorde, the poet, until I was 16. We were having a very hard time, as parents and teenagers sometimes do. And that spring of my junior year of high school, she said to me, look, if we spend the summer here together in this house, one of us is not going to survive, and I'm not going anywhere. So you're going to go to San Francisco and spend the summer with Diane. And that was Diane DePrima, who was an old buddy of my mom's and a fantastic poet in her own right. And so I went and I spent the summer with Diane. So I guess it was my third day at Diane's house, and I was there for 2 months. You know, one of these San Francisco apartments, 4th floor walk up with a long hallway lined with books and artwork. And I needed something to read. I was on my way to the bathroom and I just grabbed something off the shelf, and it was a book of my mom's poetry. And Diane had all of them. And I think at that time there were only like 10. I mean, we're talking, so it was the summer of 1979. And there might have been only 10, but there was a section, and I read all of them that summer. And needless to say, I came home with a slightly different appreciation for my mother than I'd left home with a couple of months before. And with that, I'll end.
Wow.
I just want to point out that Diane DePrima, who Audrey had met at Hunter High School, and they went to Hunter College together, published Audrey's first books. So
Cables to read.
Cables to, yeah. And, you know, she said, you've got to get, because Audrey kept revising and revising, and Diane said, no, 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 you've got to get this published, stop revising. And Diane published it. So that's great. Oh, Beth, that's great.
Thank you, Blanche.
And we had a comment in our comments to start to revisit Audrey as teacher, because I think it's so interesting how each of you have really touched on that, if it's a role of mentorship, the support, and then when, as Alexis was saying, this like unchartable influence and inspiration. And Jacqueline Brown commented to say thank you to Blanche for lifting up the name of our effort to have the West building renamed for the Audre Lorde building. So big thank you there. And so I'd love to sort of backtrack a little bit to where Blanche was touching on this incredibly powerful force of teaching and influence and mentorship. Do you want to pick that back up, Blanche?
Oh, well, I could. There's a wonderful, I'd really like to read this. Audrey kept in touch with her students from Tougaloo. And there's a moment, she's there, there's a group that's in a choir. Her poetry students were in the Tougaloo choir, and they came to Carnegie Hall with Duke Ellington. And Audrey wrote about it. But the night that they were at Carnegie Hall was the night that Martin Luther King was killed. And Audrey writes about this in Sister Outsider, I was with the Tougaloo choir when he was killed. They were singing, "What the world needs now is love." And they interrupted the song to announce that Martin Luther King was killed. And Duke Ellington started to cry. The head of the choir said, "The only thing we can do is finish this as a memorial." And they sang again, "What the world needs now is love." Everyone was crying. The audience was crying. They cut the rest of it short. And it was more than pain, the horror, the enormity of what was happening, not just the death of Martin Luther King, but what it meant. I have always had the sense of Armageddon, and it was much stronger in those days, the sense of living on the edge of chaos, not just personally, but on the world level, that we were dying, that we were killing our world. That sense had always been with me, that whatever I was doing, whatever we were doing, that was creative and right, functioned to hold us from going over the edge, that this was the most we could do while we constructed some saner future, but that we were in that kind of peril, and here it was in reality. And she taught out of that vision, and she wrote out of that vision. And when Yolanda, her friend Yolanda Butts, read her book, The First Cities, she took it to Mina Shaughnessy at City College. And Mina Shaughnessy was head of the SEEK program, which was this really great program to a search for education, elevation, and knowledge is what it was called. And it was for students in struggle who needed extra mentorship. And that was Audre's first important job after Tougaloo. And Audre never had a prepared, limited, rigid structure. It always depended on the class, the students. Every single student was there to perform, create, be part of the conversation, which changed daily with the needs of the moment in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that. Actually, I was a student of my mom's at Hunter in 1986. I took a poetry seminar. I think there were like 8 other people in the class. I mean, I remember a few folks. I mean, Cheryl Boyce Taylor, who is like a poet in residence, I think, in Brooklyn, and runs the Caribbean poetry program actually there, and Deborah Gual Delgado. I mean, there are just a bunch of folks, and we were very different folks in that class. A couple of returning students, and I guess the thing that I really, I mean, well, for one thing, I remember how difficult it was. It was, because there was, you know, there were high demands, right? That this was not the class you wanted to take to just kind of like relax and get your 3 credits. Even though, you know, sometimes you might, especially if you're a pre-med like I was in college, you might look at poetry and think, oh, yeah, this is definitely what I need to round out my program. Anybody who selected this class thinking that was going to be really sorely disappointed. But, you know, what I remember about my mother as teacher was that she reached in and pulled out the best of you. And she was not satisfied until she got the nitty-gritty. And, you know, one thing that I really remember that she just kept saying, you know, like, yes, this is a nice idea. Like she, you know, the poet would read his or her poem in the seminar, and you should listen, you know, thinking, looking, and look up and say, good ideas, but I can't smell it and I can't taste it. And I want you to go home and you're going to work on this and you're going to pull it out. And, you know, and when you can smell it and when you can taste it and this word and that word, you know, way too prosaic, you know, come out of your head a little bit, you know, that's not poetry. So anyway, I'll open it up to the floor here, but that was my minute. She did not get satisfied with, you know, just a great idea, or I really like how you throw these words around, or, you know, this is, you know, pretty, or it sounds good, or it had to be pretty and it had to sound good. And the grammar was definitely there. Sometimes I, you know, wonder, because, you know, my mom was a visionary when it came to trans folks, right? Like, I mean, really. And yet sometimes, as when I myself am struggling with pronouns, it's because I hear her voice in my ear saying, they is a plural pronoun, not a single. And for my friends and loved ones who they, them, their is, that's a personal pronoun for them. The only way I can address them in the way they've requested is that I think of them as the Queen or the Pope, because the Queen or the Pope is always addressed with a plural pronoun, and that's the only way I can get it straight. Maybe that's 25 cents per grammatical mistake, I don't know.
I would love to go back. That's great. I would love to go back to Alexis's title for the book that she's working on, because I think it really brings up this idea. There's two things I think that come out of that idea of what it means to be eternal. Part of it is the teaching, bringing your full self, which Audre did to her classes. It was the first time I'd ever, because she had let me audit one of her classes at Hunter. It was the first time I'd ever been in a class in which I felt like the teacher brought a full person to their classroom. So Audre was present as a poet, as a mother, as an activist, as a woman of color, as a lesbian. She brought all of that into the classroom in a way that made each student, if they were open to, made each student really respond to her and her work in a way that has to go on forever. Because if you've ever taken a class with her, or if you've read her work, you carry on a certain kind of legacy before you don't even have to be thinking about it, but you're doing it. The other aspect that I think is part of this concept of eternal was that Audre was very aware of being part of a movement. You know, the women in print movement, the rise of all of the feminist presses and the lesbian feminist presses. You know, when Nancy Bariano founded Firebrand Books, it was in the heart of all of these other presses that were cranking out our literature. And when she worked with Audre, it was like this symbiotic fire. And I don't know how you manage fire, but they did. And I think Audre was very appreciative of having that experience, first with Nancy at Crossing Press and then at Firebrand Books. And so she placed herself in the heart of a lesbian feminist literary movement. And as soon as you do that, you create a legacy that goes on beyond you. So I think that is part of how we get to the eternal, Audre, through those two elements, certainly.
And we also had another comment in our feed from Paula Grant, and they have said that it's just wonderful to hear Blanche, Cheryl, and Claire use the present tense when speaking of Audre, because it is true in so many ways. Audre is. We can't hug her as we would want, but she is. And
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I have very rarely started to write something in which I have not referred to something that Audre has written. And I never forget, I had a conversation about 2 years ago with a young Black lesbian activist, and this is a thought going around now out there in the world. You baby boomers let us down. You all were activists and then you stopped.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, what the heck is wrong with you? You're talking to me. And I said to her, probably a little bit of a misquote, but I basically said, you ever hear Audre Lorde say a revolution is not a one-time thing? It's not like you commit the revolution, it's over and it's done. It's like the baton gets passed on to you and the work you're supposed to do. And this young woman kind of looked at me like, oh. I said, what makes you think it's all going to be done at the end of a decade? And I'm really pleased to see that the young people in the streets today have picked that up, and an understanding that a revolution is something that has to be worked at repeatedly, and you can never just let it lie. And I learned that from Audre pretty, probably, I don't know, 40 years ago.
That life is about the struggle. Life is about the struggle, and the revolution is a process, not an event.
Yes, yes.
Revolution is a process, not an event.
Yep.
And that's something that I like, these intersections here when I hear Elizabeth talking about how rigorous taking Audre's class was and really pulling out the essence of everything. And I hear each of you touching on things, and Jill just took that into a moment of where we wanted to also discuss Audre as activist. And I don't think you can obviously separate any of the areas of where we're talking about Audre as teacher, Audre as this very human, incredible person, and as activists, they do all intersect. But I wondered if you would like to expand a little bit on Audre as activist for us.
I'd like to expand on something actually that Jewel was mentioning, that Audre having an awareness of herself as part of many movements, because one of the movements I think that she was a part of that I come across every single day is patients' rights. And you know, I mean, my mother was an amazing teacher, and she was also an amazing student. And there was nothing that she came across that she didn't believe she could find out about in a book. So when she was first diagnosed with cancer, she went down to Barnes and Noble medical textbook store. They had this huge store on 5th Avenue and 17th Street back in the day. There was like all medical textbooks. And she came walking out of there with like $300 worth of medical textbooks like this, that oncology people, you know, now they're on the 18th edition of like, you know, I won't even go into it. But her awareness of herself as this is my body, and these medical professionals who are stewarding me, you know, with this illness, are, I don't know if she ever wrote this but what it seemed to me, as somebody who first was in high school when she was first diagnosed with breast cancer and went through her initial mastectomy, and was in my last year of medical school when she passed away. is that doctors are essentially glorified plumbers. We have a certain kind of expertise. We come in, and you might have called us because you have a leaky faucet, and might have this really great, fantastic sink that we think you need right in the back of the van, and we want to bring it in and we want to install it and and the owner of the house may say, well, it's a leaky faucet. What I had in mind was a washer. Do you have a washer that you can install to fix the leak? Your sink is really nice, but I don't really want it. And who gets to decide? The owner of the house gets to decide. And that's the way I approach medicine and discussions with my patients about what options are and stuff like that. And who taught me that was my mother, actually, before I ever started medical school. So anyway, I'll leave that there.
I agree. The cancer journals really changed the direction for feminist thinkers about how we take care of ourselves. Because at that time, and I mean, it's still true to some degree, but at that time when Audre was writing about her experience with cancer, cancer was the scariest diagnosis you could get in the world. And that she would openly talk about it, talk about wresting control of her body from the medical establishment. On so many levels, it revolutionized how women were able to take care of ourselves. And the cancer journals, it's still in print, obviously, but you don't think it's just a little book. It's just a small book that gives women permission to take care of themselves.
And that was she was always so embattled, especially in the 70s, in the early 80s, because people, feminists, and there was a lot of homophobia in the Black community, and she was really embattled personally with her health, and then with her ideas. It was just amazing to see her resilience and her determination and her strength that she kept drawing on, and how she faced cancer through the years was awesome. I mean, she resisted chemotherapy until the last couple of years, really, because she felt like it would just take time away from her. So she did the alternatives, and not only did she live for 14 years, I guess, from the beginning of when she had cancer, but she also brought to Germany a whole community organizing. While she was going through her own embattlement, she was creating this incredible Afro-German movement with other women. It was she was right there on the front lines. And she was the first. I remember objection of feminists when she embraced Essex Hempel. I mean, why are we going to support him? He's a man, but he's a gay man, and he's embattled, and she was leading that too. I mean, just so many fronts that she put herself on.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add one thing about her going to Germany, to Arlesheim, and bringing back the whole naturopathy, alternative medicine and healing that wasn't really being dealt with in the US, but was very popular and is still very popular all over Europe. And Audre really brought it back for all of us. And it's really an amazing contribution, in addition to the Afro-German movement and all that she did in Berlin, which was so phenomenal. The whole alternative health movement that Audre became part of. It's really astonishing, really.
And some of these things that you're pulling into this conversation are not necessarily easy for the public to access. This is like, very personal information, and
a lot of it in a burst of light. In addition to the cancer journals, A Burst of Light has her kind of daily struggle and understanding of what is needed, and her battle with the death sentence, as she put it.
Yep.
So,
One of the things that's really, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joel, please.
I was just thinking about her as activist, as you mentioned, and just today on Instagram, yes, I do go to Instagram, Jeb, the photographer Jeb, posted this picture of Audre at the anniversary march on Washington. Because of course Jeb has photographs of everything. And it was so moving to look at it because, you know, there was a battle to get Audre on the stage at the commemorative march on Washington because she was a lesbian. And she hung in and she came and she gave a wonderful speech. But the thing about this picture is she looks sharp and young. She's so young looking. And that's, I think, important for us to think about when we think about her as an activist and all of us as activists. When we started out, we were young. We were pushing the envelope in our early years. And it's really important for us to remember that because I think younger people can't see us as younger. And so if we can express that youth, they can be validated and feel like their activism is powerful too. You know, but that I love that youthful fire in Audre in that picture. You know.
You know, I remember that so well, that march, because she was really isolated, and she asked us, Francis and Blanche, to stand at the fence that separated the speakers from the demonstrators because nobody was talking to her. And when she did speak, she was booed. And only Coretta Scott King said, "I'm so happy you were here today." And she's the person.
Yes, she did.
So emotionally charged, and Audre spoke magnificently. She didn't let, you know, anything take her off track.
and in terms of activism and being young, the first march on Washington in '63, I was living in Baltimore and going to Johns Hopkins. And so my apartment was the headquarters of the travels, and Beth, I think, slept in the bathtub that night. That was a funny memory because you were a baby, but we were all there in '63 for that first march on Washington. And, you know, Audre's writings about race, about Vietnam, about imperialism, they resonate so immediately at this moment. Sister Outsider is full of her vision for what is really going on with this terrible imperial violence, Grenada, the Nicaragua, El Salvador. This is Audre, you know, Vietnam wasn't the last war, and the CIA isn't stopping, and, you know, she wrote it all.
And one of the things that was also, you know, coming up as we were talking, and I think Blanche, you know, very soon into your introduction here, was, you know, Audre as a personal person, who has these very unique relationships with all of you, and that we have you all here today. I wanted to round out tonight's panel with sort of talking a little bit more about Audre as a very human person. You know, we have this exhibition here at the Alice Austen House, and I think it is very powerful. We have one of Jeb's photographs of Audre in her study here in Staten Island. We have so many contributions in the exhibition where Audre is really icon. And then also incredibly human in that Blanche and Clare so generously have lent their personal photo collection of themselves, Audre, Elizabeth, Jonathan, to this exhibition. And it moves me so greatly, and I would love for you to share something personal about that. And I also have really enjoyed working with so many colleagues of Audre's and friends, and listening to the crossovers of how you talk about Audre and these flirty moments and the fun that you had together.
We had a really good time together.
We had a lot of fun.
She loved to dance, and that was great fun. And she really, she would pour herself into everything she did, full. And her dancing was like no other dancing. It was just so exciting. And we flirted. We all loved to flirt with each other, the four of us, and we just carried on. Just
As best
what
we
can I
could.
tell you?
Well, I can tell you a story that's actually fit for public consumption.
Work on that.
Offline, I'll tell you the inside story. But I interviewed Audre and Maua Flowers for the film Before Stonewall. And we held the interview at Cornelia Street Cafe, which is in New York City. Well, it's now closed, but they gave us an outdoor cafe table and kept pouring wine for us. And I was off camera, and Audre and Maua were on camera. And I just, I kept asking questions, and, they were pouring wine, and they did a beautiful interview. And Audre was very specific. She did not want to be the only colored one in the film Before Stonewall, so she brought Maua with her. So I'm sitting there, and it took me about an hour to realize that they were both flirting with me so heavily. I was like, oh my God. And they were, at the end, we were trying to finish our wine, and it was like they were trying to wait each other out to see who was going to leave and who was going to stay and have dinner with me. It was hysterical. Of course, Audre won. But it was so intense and hysterically funny. And she and I laughed about it after Maua left and we ate dinner. Audre was smooth.
Yes.
I remember being at I think a conference. I forget where, but it was 1988. And it was Audre, there's a number of other lesbians. And this photographer wanted us to sit, just so she could take our picture. And, I was looking over to where I could sit. And, there was an empty chair, would be right next to Audre. And I said, oh, okay, I'll sit there. And Audre said, you can sit here, Cheryl. It's really Audre. She was trying to.
I know for a fact that both of y'all were like extremely sexy. I mean, yeah, no, I know that for a fact.
Yeah, the energy, the personal energy she was able to share with people is part of what made her so amazing. She was totally present, totally there when she was with you. And that's not easy. Certainly not easy for someone who is an activist, always on the front line, because wherever she went, people were looking to her for some kind of guidance and sustenance, personal sustenance.
Always feel like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes wonder where like all of my mom's energy like sort of came from. I mean, because she just had an amazing amount of passion for her work, for people, both close to her and really not so close. Activism, the world, incredible vision, but even just the passion in everyday, to see her cook was to just witness another aspect of that passion. Anything that happened, she wanted to fix it. Nothing drove her crazier than needing a tool and not being able to find it. Like that was like almost a big O. Oh, I need this tool. Yes, this is the perfect one. Yes. She identified pretty early that, she wanted to eat as little sugar as possible. But if you happen to have a Baby Ruth candy bar and, she might say, hey, can I have a bite? And just get your fingers out of the way. Cause like that first bite was going to count. Gardening. I mean, hey, she grew up in Harlem, okay, but moved to Staten Island and gardening. She just like loved. We lived next door to the Imities, who there was a older Italian man who was the grandfather, the patriarch of the family. She got in tight with him like this. He just adored her and she adored him. And he had everything growing up in that little Staten Island postage-sized backyard of his, peach trees and tomato plants and everything else. And she just, over the course of like 2-3 years, learned everything he had to offer and then some. It was like schooling me in how to kill slugs by putting out plates of beer and blah, blah, blah. I mean, everything that she did, she just brought it. Yeah.
And I think, I'm starting to look at our comments and questions in the chat. And one of them was, could you talk a little bit more of how Audre was dangerous? And I think that, when Elizabeth is talking about that energy that was delivered into every single aspect of what she did and was passionate about, and she was passionate about so much, and all of the stories that you have told, I think that really does cover it. It's like at each moment of this conversation that feeds into it. It is powerful, it is groundbreaking, and it is very affecting,
I think one of the things that made her really dangerous was the fact that she was a visionary, the fact that things did not get by her. I mean, she'd sit every morning at the table in the kitchen reading the New York Times from cover to cover. I spoke in Brooklyn about this just a couple of weeks ago. I remember like it was yesterday, her reading about Clifford Glover, 11-year-old shot down in the New York City subway by a police officer. And she didn't just read those things and they roll off of her or upset her for a minute. I mean, she integrated them, and it was a part of what she did for the rest of her life, was that minute at the kitchen table reading about Clifford Glover. And, as we all know, these killings are still going on. And, and I love that title, Alexis, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde. I don't know if she knew that she was living an eternal life, but that was definitely her hope. And in the last 2 years, I remember the last 2 years of her life, all these folks would come out of the woodwork to interview her, and they'd ask questions. And sometimes she'd just look at them and say, have you read? The answer to your question is on page 27 of Sister Outsider or whatever. Have you read the work? And are you doing your own work? Those were the two questions she had for these people interviewing her. And she wanted nothing more than for this work to have a life, and she would be so gratified. And if there's one regret that I have, I'm so glad that her work has the life that it has inspired all these young people, and indeed people of all ages and all over the world, with the work that is so vital and important to all of our survivals. But she would have loved the cell phone, and she would have loved texting. And with her early morning routine, she would have made Donald Trump's tweets look like a freaking tea party. So sometimes I'm sad that she's not here in body to take full advantage of those things, but I think that's what made her dangerous. And her commitment to having other people's voices fully possessed by them. That was another piece of her message. Take your voice back. There's nothing more dangerous than that. So that's how I see her as dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And she didn't let people off the hook either. She would engage until you came to the place where you needed to be. It wasn't like going to be a casual conversation about the social life. That was dangerous.
I remember in Berlin when we went over to visit Audre and Gloria and Dagmar and Ika gave us their apartment. We were staying in the apartment, and there was a little tiny, very narrow balcony. So Audre was on this side of it, and I was on this side of it, and she had wanted to read my Mary White Ovington play. So we were reading the play, and at one point when Mary White Ovington the character is who was a white woman who was one of the founders of the NAACP, she said something about losing her friends, and because of her stand on anti-racism at the turn of the last century, she was losing friends that she had. She was losing places she liked to go and things she liked to do because of racism. And Audre said, and that's where white women turn back. They don't want to have to change anything in their lives. When they get to that point, they back off. And of course that went right into the play, but she
Never
was just
turning back.
never, just don't turn back. You have to go forward, which Mary White Ovington did, but the line wasn't in the play, and she knew that it had to go right there. It was really an amazing moment.
Mm-hmm.
A note from Jacqueline Brown to you, Elizabeth. She was in that class with you and is listening and enjoyed your pronouns. Anecdote, and she just said that she found that Audre is the model of a great teacher. She cared about poetry and she cared for us. I'm loving sharing some of these things that we've got some audience members here that are close to you or have experienced things together. And there's a couple of questions here, and I just want to address them to you. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can within our remaining minutes. So forgive me if someone feels stepped over or looked over, but like some of the questions have already been answered, I think, by what you've said. Lynette Lewis has a question for Elizabeth. She says, how did your mum talk about your identity growing up? It's a pretty big question, followed up by, have you felt pressure living up to her reputation? How does it make you feel seeing her work included in so many book lists about Black Lives Matter and feminism?
Wow, great question. I remember my mom saying to me, don't be confused about who you are, because white America is not confused about who you are.
Ooh.
And because I'm a light-skinned Black woman, and as a kid was actually even lighter. So especially in the wintertime. And once we moved to Staten Island, I'd get like taken for, Italian or whatever. And I remember my mother saying to me, don't be confused. She had a copy of the Black Book in our dining room that we read. I read you know, about the lynchings and Quantaroon and Octoroon and everything else. And it's like, you know, yeah, her message to me was don't be confused about your identity. You know, that was just another very precious gift. She was a great mother, I have to say. And, you know, I'm a parent myself. Yeah, we're never perfect. But one of the big jobs of parenting is to let go. And I think that was something that my mother really had from the early days of her parenting, that she didn't see us as an extension of her identity. We're going to have identities of our own. And she was very special in that way. With regard to, do I feel pressure to live up to Audre Lorde? There is no living up to Audre Lorde. So, you know, Benjamin Disraeli said that talent does what it can and genius does what it must.
Hmm.
So, you know, my mother is part of the, I mean, Alexis, I just love your title, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, you know, in so many ways. But I mean, with regard to the canon of American literature, you know, she's there, and rightfully so. You know, I'm very blessed to have wanted to be a doctor since I was 4. So that's kind of my wheelhouse. And so in some ways, I don't have to compete because I've got my own little thing running, and it's a good thing I do, because there would have been absolutely no way. Poetry for me is something that I need for my life personally, but I'm under no illusion that I have any eternal life coming in that arena. So I don't need to compete there.
But she revolutionized American literature, and she revolutionized African American literature, because nobody was talking about being a lesbian in their work before Audre. I mean, you know, you have these people that people are digging up and saying, oh, this, she was talking to a woman here, or she was, but you know, some of these people, we know who they are. But she revolutionized African American literature and African American poetry. I don't believe there is any poetry like hers. So exquisite and so well written.
Cheryl, I wonder if you could address this question for us, or anyone on the panel, but as you're talking about this, there is a question from Dianca London, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, that they would love to hear thoughts on what aspects of Lorde's legacy, identity, and vision that have been overlooked, under-celebrated, or misinterpreted.
I don't know, Jewel. Maybe, you know, I don't know if I can answer that.
Well, I would say, I think her activism is always celebrated, and she is part of a legacy of activists. But it's like James Baldwin went through a period where people were not using James Baldwin on their syllabi. And I think sometimes that has happened with Audre. You know, you can take a poetry workshop and not see Audre, you know, and so I think sometimes people lean more toward the activist Audre rather than, as Cheryl described, that exquisite poetry that Audre was writing. And so I would love to see her work on more of the syllabi that people are doing for American poetry.
100%. And I know for a fact, teaching here on Staten Island, and I'm an educator, my background is in education, that we go into schools and the teachers haven't even heard of Audre. And so
they haven't heard of anybody in high school. Yeah. I mean, it's like really, really bad.
Yeah.
I would just say I really agree that there is something in the exact nitty-gritty and complexity of the poetry that I do think that some people have turned to the prose or the quotable, or sometimes just the title of an essay, right? and quoted it, because there is also so much there. But I think that there's so many layers in the poetry and so much. I mean, I see every single one of the poems as a ceremony, and there's so much that's possible within it, because I loved hearing you say, Elizabeth, that she was like, I want to smell it, I want to taste it, because there is so much, like you can smell it, like there is such a sensory power in the poetry. And you know, I read the poems over and over and over again. I still have my first collected poems of Audre Lorde that I got when I was in high school, from which I took the epigraph of every essay I wrote while I was in high school. And I've been reading the poems over and over again every day, and there's always something new, which I think is exactly the sign of genius, that there's such depth. It's not just like I said this. It's like you can continue to return. It's an archive. It actually holds the moment that she was in to give you access to something else. And there's always a question. Like there's always a question for my life that I find in the poems. And so I would emphasize that. And it's been a great joy to teach that poetry everywhere. I mean, even my dad, before he passed away, became an evangelist. Like everybody he met, he was like, you haven't read Audre Lorde's poetry? You know, like he became an evangelist for what people could actually get if they were to engage her poetry. And I would also say something that I've noticed just recently in my research that I don't think has necessarily been taken up in terms of Audre Lorde's activism is really the environmentalist aspect of it. I feel that over and over again, she talks about, you know, there are these conflicts that we're working out as humans, but we have to have the planet long enough to even be able to work these out. And in responses to nuclear war and the oil drilling in St. Croix, I mean, there just is there's so many times that she's speaking about the environment, and obviously in the poetry itself, there's so much about the earth and the world and being part of that. And I don't feel like that has necessarily been, I don't hear it talked about so much in the conversation about Audre Lorde as an activist or what her legacy represents. But I think that there's something in this idea of survival that it's beyond the human species, but it's also about humans being accountable to the earth itself that I think could be lifted up more.
Thank you, Alexis. There has been a number of people asking, Jill, you brought it up, that Jeb's post today, the name of Joni Byron is the photographer who goes by Jeb, which is J-E-B, who could have very well contributed so many things to this panel tonight also, and who is a very, very dear friend of Alice Austen. So I hope everyone got that. Look, I just want to say this has been the most fun and moving panel I have ever had the honor of being able to shepherd, and I could have dinner with you all every week. And I really, really, on a personal note, would just love to organize another call for us to break down some of the things that we talked about today. And I'm so thrilled that this panel will be recorded so that people that couldn't make it on tonight will be able to access it we will make it available. The Alice Austen House will make it available via our website after a 1-week period when we are able to access the file, and it will be broadcast again as another CulturePass event in October. So I thank you, Elizabeth. I thank you, Blanche and Claire. I thank you, Jewel. I thank you, Alexis. I thank you so much, Cheryl. You are all inspirations to me and the work that we try very, very hard to do here at the Alice Austen House.
You did a good job.
Wonderful. Thank you, Victoria.
Good job. Thank you. Right.
Thanks for the chance to hang out with old friends.
Yeah.
Audre in 1986 wrote that tomorrow belongs to those of us who conceive it as belonging to everybody, who lend the best of ourselves to it, and with joy.
Incredible joy.
Very good.
Thank
Excellent.
you. That's great. That's great. See you all next time.
Next time.
Here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Please make plans to visit us here.
Absolutely. Allison, thank you for shepherding us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Allison.
You're Allison.
You're welcome. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Victoria, to the Alice Austen House. Thank you for being here today. And
Take
thank you
care.
for all the wonderful comments. I see everyone says, wonderful program. Thank you so much. This was an excellent event. This has been incredible.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Bye.
Good night.
Take care.